The Jolly Rancher's dark side. Let's play Hardball. Good evening, I'm Steve Kornacki in for Chris Matthews, and leading off tonight, more trouble at Bundy Ranch. Cliven Bundy, the anti-government rancher who became the latest cause celeb of the far right, has vaulted himself back into the news with comments about African Americans in slavery that first appeared in today's New York Times. Bundy describes a housing project in North Las Vegas where he says he's seen African Americans dependent on government subsidies, quote, sitting on the porch with nothing to do, and wonders whether African Americans were, quote, better off as slaves. The right-wing's anti-government hero is looking a little tarnished today, and some elected Republicans who had been understanding of his point, if not his methods, are now denouncing his comments and running away from Bundy. James Peterson is an MSNBC contributor and director of Africana Studies and associate professor at Lehigh University, and Wayne Slater is senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News. Cliven Bundy's comments in the New York Times, wondering whether African Americans were better off during slavery, were captured on video. Let's take a look at that.
I want to tell you one more thing I know about the Negro. When I go through Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and I would see these little government houses, and in front of that government house, the door was usually open, and the older people and the kids, and there's always at least a half a dozen people sitting on the porch. They didn't have nothing to do. They didn't have nothing for their kids to do. They didn't have nothing for their young girls to do. And because they were basically on government subsidy, and so now what do? They abort their young children. They put their young men in jail because they never learned how to pick cotton. And I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves, picking cotton, having family life and doing things, or are they better off under government subsidy?
Transfer. They just transferred it, that's all.
Yeah, they didn't get no more freedom. They got less freedom.
All right, James, I'm kind of not sure where to start with all this, but I think here's one thing that jumps out at me is just the overwhelming irony of this. The quote he has there, he's talking about seeing African Americans in North Las Vegas saying they were basically on government subsidy. And this is the same guy who hasn't paid his grazing fees in 20 years, apparently owes the government about $1 million. I mean, you talk about being on government subsidy, right. The complete lack of self-awareness that he could say something like this given his own situation.
That's right. That's part of what makes this patently absurd. You might also note the phonetics in his pronunciation of the outdated term Negro. But then, to be honest with you, Steve, I think this unveils for us the ugly side of anti-government, anti-federalist sort of ideologies in America, that oftentimes those folk who subscribe to the sort of most entrenched anti-federalism, anti-Obama ideologies are also happen to be racist. And so his comments, I think, reveal that, and this is why you're seeing a lot of his Republican cheerleaders doing the two-step. But I have to just concede to you here, Steve, this is offensive. To hear it, to see it, to be reading about it, the fact that we have to talk about it, it's just patently offensive. But you have to think about the fact that he has ideas that other folk have, and that it's actually been tied more often than not, these anti-government feelings, to those folk who are also racist still in America.
Well, yeah, Wayne, that's a point that makes me wonder, because I don't want to say all Republicans, all conservatives were right. rallying behind this guy. That's not true. But what James is saying is you look at the roots of this sort of anti-government movement. You think like Ruby Ridge in 1992, and Randy Weaver. The government had sort of encountered him at Aryan Nation events. So there has been this intersection between white supremacy, between racism, and between this sort of the fiercest strain of sort of anti-government sentiment out there. It seems like nobody should be surprised that it came to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point. Why should we be surprised? You shouldn't be surprised that this guy said this. And you should also not be surprised by efforts to marginalize him and to say that you are just an aberration. He is not an aberration. Among the birther, secessionist, militia, marginalia on the far right, this racism is one of the elements that's like a toxic undercurrent. It has long fed the ideology of these folks. And so it's no surprise that somebody would bring it up. The surprise is, I think, politically, that you have erstwhile, otherwise intelligent, conservative Republicans and certainly some maybe less intelligent talk show types who jump on the bandwagon, the anti-government bandwagon, beating up on the new shiny object, the Bureau of Land Management, without thinking about 2 steps ahead. Wait a minute, who is this guy and what's behind some of this rhetoric?
Well, so late this afternoon, Bundy gave another press conference where he tried to explain what he meant. It actually ended up sounding awfully familiar.
I'm wondering, are they better off with their young women aborting their children? Are they better off with their young men in prison? And are they better off with the older people on the sidewalks in front of their government-issued homes with a few children on them? Are they better off? Are they happier than they was when they was in the South in front of their homes with their chickens and their gardens and their children around them and their men having something to do? Are they better off? I'm wondering. And that's the question I put before the world. Are they better or were they better then? I'm not saying that I thought they should be slaves or I'm never even saying they was better off one way or the other. I'm wondering if they're better off.
James, he's trying to draw a distinction there between I wasn't saying it, but I was just wondering. But that's, I mean, that's the clarifying press conference, and that sounds exactly the same as last week.
Exactly. The depths of this guy's ignorance has no limitation at this point. But let me be clear: there is an important point for us to take out of this. What he's saying about the prison-industrial complex and mass incarceration is important, which is to say that it's part of a system that, throughout history, Michelle Alexander does a great job of tracking this in the new Jim Crow, does stem from the institution of slavery. But what this nut job doesn't realize is that that's the system that we're still fighting against, right? There is no one in their right mind who believes that being enslaved, being chattel, being traded and sold as property is somehow or in someone's imagination better than being free and alive in America. No one believes that. So for him to say that and to try to sort of couch it in this fake apology is even more racist than the original comments.
So Wayne, I guess one of the questions I have is you're trying to figure out how widespread views like this are. Maybe not the specifics, but just the basic intersection of the anti-government ideology with sort of overtly racist sentiments like we're hearing from Cliven Bundy. I mean, do we have a sense? Again, I'm saying this is not the whole conservative movement. This isn't the majority of the conservative movement. But do we have a sense how big that this sort of group would be?
And that's, we need to think about that. This is obviously not every rancher. This is not every conservative, not every Republican. Obviously, that's the case. But the truth is, it is a fairly substantial intellectual underpinning which has fed a portion of the party that the more reasonable, moderate or moderately conservative political types, like our own Rick Perry, like Ted Cruz, George P. Bush, who's running for land commissioner here, a senator in Nevada we saw, were quick to jump on the bandwagon for political purposes, recognizing or trying to ignore that there is this toxic aspect to where some of this stuff comes from. How widespread are the racists, the overt racists? That's not very widespread, but it does feed an anti-government sentiment that when you hear them talk about the president as being illegitimate, we know what that means, or the government as being lawless, we know exactly what that means. It feeds the rhetoric, and that is widespread on the far right.
Well, I want to pick up what you were saying there, because you mentioned elected Republicans would express some sort of understanding, sympathy, when it came to Bundy's beef with the Bureau of Land Management, if not his methods.
Now, again, Steve, most of them are running like scalded dogs.
Right. Well, that's exactly what we're getting to. Because today, some of them put out statements denouncing his content. Senator Rand Paul, whose spokesman initially told the New York Times that Paul was not immediately available for comment. That was in their story. Then he told NBC News Today his remarks on race are offensive, and I wholeheartedly disagree with him. A spokesperson for Republican Nevada Senator Dean Heller was quoted in the New York Times article saying the senator completely disagrees with Mr. Bundy's appalling statements and condemns them in the most strenuous disingenuous way. So yes, obviously, look, the great, walk back has begun from any Republican, any elected official who came within, a mile of this guy. But I guess I want to focus on the question of Rand Paul just for a second, James, because this is not the first time, think about Rand Paul had this guy on his staff who was known as the Southern Avenger. Remember this? He had the
That's right.
the Confederate flag, the comments about Abraham Lincoln and race and all these things. And he, eventually left Rand Paul's staff. Rand Paul was very hesitant to have him leave the staff, very hesitant to say anything, negative about him afterwards. He had Rand Paul, who on this network a few years ago had that incredible interview where he expressed reservations about the public accommodations part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So I look at Rand Paul, and at the same time, this is a guy who's made some, steps towards trying to bring, African American voters in the Republican Party, talked about broadening the base, but this is getting to be a pattern with him.
It is a bit of a pattern. There's no walking back that I think can change what you just laid out for us in terms of Rand Paul's career and the challenges he's had around racial rhetoric, the kinds of things he's done over this past week in Wisconsin in terms of talking about the prison industrial complex and how it impacts black and brown communities is important work, but it just smacks of being purely political. It smacks of being purely a sort of attempt to pander to or outreach to a specific community every time he sort of gets drawn back into these things. Just to your earlier question, Steve, the Southern Poverty Law Center has documented a rise in these kinds of hate groups, and we certainly have seen studies about the ways in which the internet has become a space for racial hate to sort of percolate. And so I don't know if we can say whether or not it's widespread, but we can certainly say that Republicans somehow and for some reason believe that these folk, the folk who still hold on to these old school racial ideologies, are a part of their base. I don't even know if that's the fact, but they believe that, and that's why we always see them doing this two-step. This happens all the time. They find a darling. It ends up that this darling has racial views that can be associated with other members of their base, and they have to walk it back. And so I'm not surprised by any of this, but it seems to me not to be very politically smart for them to continue to find themselves in the same situation.
Yeah, and then they're in this situation where they're trying to say, well, yeah, the sentiment, the cause was right, but we just had no idea that this person had any of these views, and that's where we are today. Anyway, thank you, James Peterson and Wayne Slater. Coming up, bonfire of the Hannity. Sean Hannity conceded this afternoon that, yes, the comments by Cliven Bundy, who he's been promoting and supporting, are despicable and beyond repugnant. But that came after Hannity learned the hard way why you don't pick a fight with Jon Stewart. Plus, 2 weeks ago, Hillary Clinton couldn't name an accomplishment as Secretary of State. This week, the State Department spokeswoman was stumped by a similar question. Hillary might want to come up with an answer because the Republicans certainly have their own one-word answer ready: Benghazi. Also, the right has to find something to criticize President Obama for in his overseas trip. Enter the Drudge Report with this headline: U.S. President bows to Japanese robot. And finally, let me finish tonight with the best decision Hillary Clinton ever made. This is Hardball, the place for politics.